3 U.S. Coast Guard vessels erupted in flames simultaneously at 4:47 a.m. Eastern Time, their burning hulls lighting up the pre-dawn darkness near the Windward Passage between Cuba and Haiti. Commander Sarah Mitchell felt the shockwave before she heard the explosion, a deep, gut-wrenching boom that rattled the windows of the Naval Command Center in Key West and Florida, where she'd been monitoring routine patrol routes. "All units, report status immediately," she commanded into her headset, her fingers already flying across the keyboard to access satellite feeds. The response came in fragments, static, screaming, then silence. Mitchell's throat tightened as the thermal imaging appeared on her screen. The 3 patrol boats, Resolute, Vigilant, and Steadfast, were nothing but burning wreckage scattered across 12 nautical miles of Caribbean water. 73 servicemen and women had been aboard those vessels. Her hands trembled as she reached for the red phone that connected directly to Southcom headquarters in Miami. "This is Commander Mitchell at Sector Key West. We have a code red situation, multiple vessels down. I repeat, multiple vessels down in the Windward Passage. This was not an accident. Within 18 minutes, every military installation from Texas to Virginia went to DEFCON 3. President Katherine Walsh was awakened in the White House residence, her chief of staff's face pale and drawn in the harsh light of her bedroom. "Madam President, we need you in the Situation Room immediately. We're under attack." The limestone walls of the White House basement felt suffocating as Walsh descended the stairs, still buttoning her jacket. The Situation Room buzzed with controlled chaos. Generals, intelligence chiefs, and cabinet members crowded around the central table where holographic displays showed real-time data from the Caribbean theater. "Talk to me," Walsh commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Admiral James Crawford, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, pulled up a tactical map that made Walsh's blood run cold. Red markers indicated not just the destroyed Coast Guard vessels, but 18 additional points of attack stretching from the Gulf of Mexico to the Lesser Antilles. At 0447 hours, coordinated strikes hit our assets across the entire Caribbean basin. We've confirmed Mexican naval forces attacking from the west and Venezuelan forces from the south. They've established a blockade line from Cancun to Trinidad. Every commercial shipping lane is now a combat zone. The room fell silent except for the hum of computers and the distant rumble of Marine One engines spinning up on the south lawn, a precautionary measure in case evacuation became necessary. "How is this possible?" Secretary of Defense Martin Reynolds asked, his normally commanding voice cracking. "Our intelligence showed nothing. No troop movements, no naval deployments, nothing." CIA Director Angela Moss stepped forward, her face ashen. The images behind her showed grainy satellite photos taken just 48 hours earlier. They hid in plain sight. What we thought were commercial fishing fleets and cargo vessels were actually retrofitted warships. The Mexicans moved their assets under the cover of their annual naval exercises. Venezuela used their oil tanker routes as camouflage. By the time our analysts recognized the pattern, the attack had already begun. Walsh's jaw clenched. She thought of the families who would receive notifications today. The children who would grow up without parents. The empty chairs at Thanksgiving tables. What are their demands? Moss activated an audio file. A deep, measured voice filled the room. President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, speaking in heavily accented English. "The era of American hegemony in our waters has ended. For too long, the United States has dictated terms, imposed sanctions, and interfered in the sovereign affairs of our nations. Mexico and Venezuela stand united. We claim the Caribbean as our territorial sea. All U.S. Military presence must withdraw within 72 hours, or we will consider it an act of war justifying further defensive action." The recording ended. Walsh looked around the table at the faces of her advisors. Some showed anger, others showed fear, most showed both. "Options," she said simply, General Patricia Hoffman, commander of U.S. Southern Command, stood. Her uniform was crisp despite the early hour. Her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. We can have the 3rd Fleet in position within 36 hours. The 82nd Airborne is ready to deploy. But, Madam President, we need to be clear about what we're facing. Mexico has the 12th largest military in the world. Venezuela's armed forces are battle-hardened from years of internal conflict. Together, they can field over 700,000 troops, 2,000 armored vehicles, and more than 500 aircraft. This isn't Iraq or Afghanistan. This is 2 nation-states with significant military capabilities and the element of surprise. Walsh felt the weight of the presidency pressing down on her shoulders. Through the reinforced glass of the Situation Room, she could see staffers running through corridors, their faces tight with barely controlled panic. "Casualties?" Crawford's voice was heavy. "Confirmed 73 dead from the Coast Guard vessels. Another 42 from a naval supply depot in Puerto Rico that was hit by cruise missiles. We're still getting reports from civilian vessels caught in the crossfire. Early estimates put total American deaths at over 200, with that number climbing. 200 American lives gone in a single coordinated assault." Walsh thought of the speech she would have to give, the funerals she would attend, the letters she would write to grieving families. "What about our allies? Britain, France, and the Netherlands all have territories in the Caribbean," Moss replied. "They've been contacted. Initial responses are cautious. No one wants to commit to military action until they understand the full scope of the situation. The UN Security Council is convening an emergency session, but Russia and China have already indicated they'll veto any resolution condemning the attacks." Of course they would, Walsh thought bitterly. This wasn't just about Mexico and Venezuela. This was about the global order fracturing in real time. "Energy markets?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be catastrophic. Treasury Secretary David Chen pulled up economic data. Oil futures are up 47% in pre-market trading. Natural gas up 38%. The Caribbean routes handle 22% of all UDS petroleum imports. If this blockade holds, we're looking at $8 per gallon gasoline within a week. Stock markets in Asia have already crashed. Europe is following. We're facing potential economic collapse if we don't resolve this quickly. Walsh closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. When she opened them, her gaze was steel. "I need to address the nation within the hour. Get me solid intelligence on their forced disposition, rules of engagement recommendations, and a diplomatic back channel to Mexico City. Someone there must realize this is suicide for their economy, too." But even as she gave the orders, Walsh knew the terrible truth. The world had changed in those early morning hours. The post-World War II international order, the Pax Americana that had kept global shipping lanes open and enforced a rough peace for 80 years, had just been violently challenged in America's own backyard. As her advisors dispersed to their tasks, Walsh remained standing at the holographic display, staring at those red markers spreading across the Caribbean like a fatal infection. Somewhere out there, in the warm waters between nations, American sailors were still fighting, still dying, still believing that help would come. She had 72 hours to make sure they weren't fighting alone.